Geeks and geekettes, gats and gittens, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, mushi mushi, buongiorno, V-Gates to all of our comic fans from all around the world. Welcome once again to Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a seasoned comic book professional, a lion of the comic book industry, questions about what I do for a living, my important work. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. And you get to ask me questions. You comic book fans, you lucky comic book fans and aficionados get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And before we start, think about subscribing. My subscription numbers have gone up thanks to you folks, and I guess thanks to me asking you to bring my subscription numbers up. We're past 8,000, heading for 10,000, which they assure me is some kind of a magic number. We'll see if any magic happens when we reach it. But thank you if you've subscribed. And thank you if you're about to subscribe. Just hit that old button. It doesn't cost a dime. And you can more directly support this channel at Subscribestar. I still have a few copies of My Sister Suprema #1. It's Suprema's Origin issue, and they will go out free if you sign up at Subscribestar. And I'll put the link in the comments. Let's get to questions. Robert Dungato, would you have worked, or were you ever offered to work on the last Zarnanian, the main man, Lobo? Do you think he works well mixed with the rest of the DC universe, or did he better occupy a position that could be considered fringe at best? Lobo is definitely a fringe character, much like I think Punisher is a fringe character at Marvel. I was never asked to work on Lobo. I never got anywhere near any Lobo projects, not because I don't like Lobo, but because for me, Lobo was such a kind of more violent personification of Alan Grant's personality. Lobo was an agent of chaos. And I think Alan was a guy, I've said this before, that you couldn't pin his politics down. You never knew what Alan was where his opinion was going to drop on any given subject, which to me meant, he was an independent thinker, a free thinker, and that's where his real creative engine was in this point where, he just looked at the world fresh. And he always had an outsider's point of view on everything. I think all writers have outsider point of views, but Alan was like an outlier of outsiders. Just an amazing mind that could come up with just rapid fire ideas that were fresh and new and everything else. And Lobo was an extension of that. I think he was a disruptive force in the DC universe and fun while it lasted. And I looked forward to every special and miniseries and everything else that Alan did with artists like Keith Giffen and Simon Bisley and guys like that. It was a celebration. I particularly remember a really funny Lobo Christmas special. See, he's very much like the Punisher, where Don Daly would have the Punisher appear in inappropriate themes and specials. Alan would have Lobo do the same thing. And I think some of the editors at DC didn't really appreciate the character. They were sort of appalled by a lot of the stuff Alan was doing, but the character, sold well and had a loyal following. I don't know where the character is today. Probably vanished somewhere in the many reboots and restarts and crises that the DC Comics have had. But hopefully, he's out there somewhere. Oh, Roberto, another question. Do a lot of comics from the bigger companies look lazily done these days because the art teams are not up to par or because they get shittily paid? Do you have any idea how much freelance artists in the comic field earn today? I really don't know anything about current page rates. I just know they're low. I joke all the time when people say, well, would you go back to DC and Marvel? And I say, well, I couldn't take the pay cut. But it's really not a joke because I would have to take a pay cut to work for DC and Marvel, in addition to all the other problems that I would have working at DC and Marvel. But it's now why are the comics so poorly crafted for the most part at the big two? Is it the pay or is it the talent? Well, it's kind of both. It's all part of the doom loop that Marvel and DC are in right now. This spiraling down in quality and sales are tied together. As they basically chased away most of the actually talented comic book creators to replace them with people who had who voted for the right person in the prior election, the quality suffered. And surprise, surprise, comic book fans appreciate quality writing and quality art. Who knew? You people are so picky. You're so demanding. When you put down your $5 or whatever for your next 20 pages of Spider-Man, you actually want a story you want to read and art you want to look at. I mean, come on. You're an intolerant bunch, aren't you? So anyway, as the quality suffered, the sales went down, because nobody wanted to read the crap. Nobody wanted to look at it. And as the sales went down, obviously the profits went down. And when the profits went down, they had to lower the page rates in order to continue creating content for the monthly comics. In addition to that, you still have a few top-line creators who they couldn't cut the page rates for. In order to keep them, they had to maintain their high page rates. And so everyone else has to get a lower page rate so they can afford those guys. That's something that's happened in comics for a long time, so that's never going to change. But you see how the two are linked together. You have poor quality comics leading to poorer sales, which leads to poorer quality comics because the people producing them either can't produce at the lower page rates or they won't work as hard at the lower page rates. So you're attracting lesser and lesser grade of talent as the page rates fall. And where is it going to end? Hopefully in a complete collapse of DC and Marvel Comics. I mean, it's on the way. It's already happening. If it hasn't happened already, I mean, DC Comics doesn't even have offices. I mean, we're seeing layoffs. We're seeing a reduction in the amount of material they're producing. The wheels are coming off. The money just isn't there anymore. And I don't see a comeback. I would really hope that they fall so that they can rise again. Hopefully under the aegis of people with more common sense who actually want to have a working comic book business and create comics that you and I want to read again. But, who knows when that'll happen or if that will happen. As far as page rates in comics in general, I mean, personally, I'm doing fine. I'm doing work for various independents and crowdfunding people and everywhere else, and I'm being paid my full page rate. Basically my basic page rate paid by DC Comics the last time I worked for them. And I'm paid on time, and I'm getting participation, I'm getting royalties, I'm getting bonuses. So financially, for me, the independence is a much better place to be than DC and Marvel currently. Creeper Weirdo. Hey, Chuck, I thought of more questions for you. I'm wondering if I should give guys like Alan Moore or Neil Gaiman a chance. I don't want to get into a story just for the work to become proto-woke. Am I being too sensitive? I just don't want to waste my time. I'm not going to tell you not to read somebody because, I mean, Neil Gaiman, pictured here, he's a comic book craftsman. He's an excellent storyteller. A very imaginative writer. He's got a huge following. There has to be a reason for that. He's a smart guy with a great imagination. Understands the medium. His stuff just doesn't appeal to me. It's kind of got a fey hipster feel. It's a little too twee, a little too precious for me. But, a lot of people like that stuff, and he's good at it. I mean, if he wasn't good at it, he wouldn't have the huge following that he has. So, yeah, I mean, give the guy a try. And I haven't read a lot of Gaiman work, but I've never seen anything that shouted woke to me. I never saw that he gave into any kind of political trend one way or the other. It always seemed to me, I mean, unless I'm wrong, unless some of you have read more Gaiman work than I have, and you've seen, him preaching some political agenda, or espousing some ideology. I don't know. I never saw it. I think he takes the task seriously to appeal to a more universal audience than that. Alan Moore, on the other hand, I don't see a lot of politics in his work. Certainly, he's political on the internet and other places. Recently announcing that he's going to give all of his DC royalties, his ongoing DC royalties, he's going to contribute them to Black Lives Matter, which I used to defend Alan Moore and say he wasn't crazy, but I can't really do that now because he's going to give potentially millions of dollars to an organization that has been demonstrated to be a fraud. Black Lives Matter, sounds like it has good intentions, but it's revealed to be a Marxist organization dedicated to the destruction of the nuclear family. And if that's your ideology, that's your ideology. But worse than that is Black Lives Matter did nothing to help black people except the black people who were running Black Lives Matter, who awarded themselves with homes, hired all of their family members at exorbitant salaries. And remember, this organization was getting corporate donations in the tens of millions. This organization garnered hundreds of millions of dollars that apparently all of it simply vanished and didn't help anybody. There's no scholarship programs. There's no aid programs for African American families. There's no effort to fight crime or drug abuse or anything else within the African American community. They basically did nothing but take money and shout a lot. And Moore has given all his money to them. Now, that aside, I really like a lot of Alan Moore's work. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, his straight up DC superhero stuff. He wrote some terrific Batman and Superman stuff back in the day. And again, like Neil Gaiman, he's a master comics craftsman. He understands the medium. A lot of his work is very exciting. Some of it doesn't appeal to me, but a lot of it does. His Tom Strong stuff, I think, is a lot of fun. So, give him a try. And again, I don't see anything woke in his work. Okay, I'm a big Guy Gardner and Joe Staton fan. I remember when I saw it was going to be you doing Guy Gardner years one, I was surprised as I didn't really recall you being involved with Guy, Green Lantern, or the Justice League before. How did you get on that? Turned out great. I don't know what that means, FWIW. Well, I'll figure it out later. I own the original double page spread at the beginning of the last issue. Okay, cool. Cool. Now, how I got on Guy Gardner was Kevin Dooley was the editor, and they had premiered a Guy Gardner solo series, and they expected it to do really well. I remember DC comic people thought that it was going to perform, and it didn't. It didn't perform, and everybody was surprised. I mean, I was surprised. I mean, the story seemed to be pretty good, and you had Joe Staton on the art. Joe Staton rocking Guy Gardner. But I think rightfully Kevin Dooley determined, and this is one of the rare times I ever agreed with Kevin Dooley on anything, Kevin Dooley determined that the first issues of Guy Gardner were all set in space. They were cosmic stuff, sci-fi stuff. And it's really odd, but American comic readers don't like that stuff. Whenever a book goes cosmic, its sales always go down. So Kevin thought, well, let's move the series to a more earthbound storyline. And he got the idea of, well, let's tell Guy Gardner's basically more about his origin, more about his life in Baltimore and the rest of it. And he hired me because Kevin Dooley was always looking for the next hot guy. Whatever the new hot artist was, if he could get them, so he could high five at an editorial meeting. I got Joe Slobotnik to draw the next issue. Yay! Everybody at Wizard Magazine loves Joe Slobotnik. He's the number one. He's the greatest guy. Can't draw a straight line, but the fans love him. That kind of thing. So he got me because at the time I was pistol hot. I was working on a lot of stuff at DC and Marvel simultaneously. And he thought, oh, I'm going to get this hot writer and we're going to turn this ship around. But it really didn't work out that way. So Guy Gardner Year One was a lot of fun to work on. I mostly took the book on because I wanted to reform Guy Gardner's reputation at DC Comics. That he was some sort of a right-wing idiot. I wanted to show that he was a more nuanced, a deeper character than that, and that conservatives can actually be feeling, thinking people. It was a big shocker to the New York liberals at DC Comics, and humanizing. Yes, Guy Gardner is an arrogant jerk, but we love arrogant jerks sometimes, especially when they're on the right side, and that's how he presented it. Now, the reason why I left it was because it's really only I got into Guy Gardner. I really enjoyed writing it. I think Joe and I did some exemplary work on it. But that was the thing. The main reason I was doing Guy Gardner is I really liked working with Joe Staton. And it wasn't until I called Joe and said that I had some research materials to send him. And Joe said, don't send them to me. I'm not on the book anymore. I'm like, what? It's like, yeah, Kevin fired me like 2 issues ago. So my last few scripts didn't even go to Joe. They went to a new artist. It was probably hot and mentioned Lizard 2 or 3 times. So Joe was no longer on the book. So I called Kevin and said, hey, I'm going to do one more script for you, but that's it. Because I was on this book to work with Joe, and you fired Joe, and you didn't tell me you fired Joe because you knew I wouldn't be interested in doing the book anymore. And so that was the end of that. Okay, related. Any good Joe Staton stories? The guy has a wonderful cartoony style that just screams comics to me in the best possible way. Yet I rarely hear people talk about him. Well, Joe, I loved working with Joe, and I like Joe. Joe's just an awesome guy. He's just a comic fan. He's just down in the long boxes with the rest of us. He just digs the medium, and I dig the medium. And he's a soft-spoken kind of quiet guy, but he's a lion when it comes to the comics medium. I mean, he doesn't take any crap when it comes to his work and all the rest of it. And so I worked with him a number of times on different Batman projects and things like that, and always we did some Scooby-Doo together. Just a terrific guy and a terrific artist. And you're right, he has that cartoony style that is just so comic book. It's just so perfect for comics. Now, do I have a Joe story that's amusing or interesting? Yeah, I have a really geeky Joe story about how geeky I am, about how geeky he is, and about how geeky Alan McKenzie is. Now, Alan McKenzie is a big mover and shaker in UK comics. And what the hell does Alan McKenzie have to do with Joe Staton? Well, I'm going to tell you. Back in the 70s, Alan McKenzie put an ad, a little classified ad, in the Comic Buyer's Guide. And he was looking for comic fans to trade comics with. So he wanted American comics, and he was willing to trade UK comics. Well, it turns out I was the only guy that wrote to him. This is back when we used to write letters, folks, put stamp on it and wait a week till it got to England and another week for them to reply. And so we started trading stuff. This is how I found out about 2000 AD and all this other things. So I'm sending him bundles of American comics. He's sending me bundles of British comics, and I'm digging it. Well, he sends me a letter, and he says that he's gotten a hold of some British artwork, original artwork. And if he sent it to me, would I take it to conventions to trade for American comic book artwork? And I was like, yeah, sure. And he had a list of guys, and Joe Staton was at the top. He wanted some Joe Staton original artwork. And so he sent me this huge package. It must have cost a fortune to ship of artwork. And I opened it up, and it was stuff like this. it was painted pages. And they were enormous. They were from the British Weekly Comics, and they were enormous. They were just huge pieces of artwork. And by Frank Bellamy, John Burns, not our John Byrne here in the United States, but John Burns in Britain, and a bunch of other guys. And I was like, whoa, this stuff is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it's colored in with Dr. Martin's dyes. I mean, just absolutely fantastic stuff. And I had like 10 pieces, and some of them were like a little bent up, and some of them had like stains on them, like somebody spilled tea. I'm assuming tea because it's England. And I was able to take chlorine bleach and get the tea stains out from the panel borders and things like that. I mean, I did a little restoration work on my own with a Q-tip and some diluted bleach, cleaned the stuff up, pressed the stuff so all the pages were flat. They were all on heavy illustration board. If I'm getting too geeky, sorry. This is about comic books. And some of you are probably on the edges of your seat right now. I know I would be. So anyway, I contacted Alan and wrote him a letter. I said, this artwork is amazing. It's absolutely astounding. But why is it so beat up? And he had to admit that he had taken it out of the dumpster behind the publishing company. He found it thrown away. Yeah, it's horrifying. So anyway, I went to this convention. I think it was over in New Jersey. And Joe Staten was there because he lived in Jersey. So I saw Joe Staten a lot as a fan because he would be at all the local shows because, they were all within driving distance. So I go over to Jersey and I'm hauling this big old portfolio with me. And I mean, it's big. These pieces of artwork are huge. And I go up to him and I said, look, Joe, would you be willing to trade original artwork with someone? And I explained the whole story to him that I just told you. And he's like, no, I really don't let my originals go. I don't sell them. And I don't trade them. I try to keep all of my originals. And he had stacks of originals there, Green Lantern and all this other stuff, as like a demonstration. He just had them so people could look through them to see what comic book pages look like. And none of them were for sale. And I said, oh man, it's a shame because this guy really wanted to trade with you. He's a huge fan of your work. And Joe's like, well, I'm curious. Let me see what he had to trade. Why bring these things out? And his eyes pop. He's looking at him. He's speechless. And he says, well, how would the trade work? So I said, well, what do you think is fair? And he goes, well, I would trade like 4 or 5 pages for each one of these. And that's what we did. And I got a whole bunch of Joe Staten pages for Alan McKenzie, and he was over the moon. He was happy man because he got Joe Staten pages, which at the time where I don't know what Joe's stand on selling originals are now. I very rarely see any of his originals offered for sale, so I assume he has the same policy. So Alan was very happy to get some, be the proud owner of some rare Joe Staten pages in the wild. Alan Cafferty, again, I found myself collecting a lot of Legends of the Dark Knight lately. When I was a kid, it didn't seem appealing to me. But now, as I flip through the names of the people involved in the covers, I can't believe I was that young and stupid. How did that book operate behind the scenes? Did the editors seek artistic teams out, or was there a lot of pitches? What was the reputation of the book within DC? Well, Legends of the Dark Knight was kind of like a premier Batman title. It was an anthology. The stories didn't necessarily have to be in continuity. They didn't even necessarily have to be canon. And it opened the doors to a lot of creators who might otherwise not have gotten a chance to do Batman, because at the time it was me and Alan and Doug were the regular Batman writers, and it was a closed house. But this allowed other creators to jump in. Now Alan and Doug and I wrote a bunch of these as well. Denny O'Neil wrote a bunch. But we used these to establish new characters, to establish new storylines. The idea of Venom was created here, the drug that Bane takes. There was a lot of like year 2, year 3 stories, all kinds of stuff, from the ridiculous to the sublime. And how it worked was it was pitching, because when you announce, hey, we're looking for Batman stories, 5-issue arcs, one shot issues, whatever, creators were going to line up around the block, because everybody wanted to do Batman. Everybody's always wanted to do Batman. It's the premier comic book character, the most famous comic book character in the world next to Superman. So, it was a jamboree. And everybody showed up. Now, every once in a while, Archie Goodwin was the editor. Every once in a while, he would approach people and say, I need this kind of story or that kind of story. Or what if we did this? What if we did that? And he approached me because Mick McMahon, the British artist, needed work. And we did a 3-issue thing that was supposed to be set in Batman's future. But DC didn't like that and just inexplicably made us do a little bit of rewriting and set it in the present. But I always like those issues. But when you read them, you'll be really confused because there's like flying cars in the background. So, Mick did a lot of futuristic stuff on that one. Another issue of Dark Knight I worked on an issue, a one-shot with Gary Koepp that when we were done was deemed to be so controversial, DC refused to publish it. So that didn't work out. And then another one, I can't remember if Archie approached me on this or I pitched it, but it was the idea that Joker winds up with Ra's al Ghul. It was like a Ra's al Ghul Joker team up in which Joker is put in the Lazarus pit and comes out sane. And it was drawn by Jim Aparo. It was basically, the idea was to give, it was Jim Aparo's like one of those post-retirement jobs that Jim Aparo was given. And so it was proposed a 5-issue arc in Dark Knight. And we got Graham Nolan to ink it. And Graham Nolan inked it in classic Jim Aparo style. I mean, it looked like Jim Aparo from like 1979. And gorgeous stuff. But then Archie, unfortunately, Archie passed away. And the editorship was given over to Andy Helfer. Andy Helfer was not a huge fan of mine, I don't think. And he just left it on a shelf for a long time. And then he contacted me, or I ran into him at the DC offices, and he said, I'm thinking of doing that Jim Aparo arc in Legends of the Dark Knight, and but I'm going to have it re-inked. I don't like the inking. I was like, okay, I'm not going to argue with you. You're the editor. I can't remember who they had ink it, but it was more detailed, more busy. I mean, the end result was terrific. I still prefer Graham's, but his choice wasn't bad, and it really, to his mind, amped the artwork up. But the thing I always remember is that Andy says, I took it out of the drawer out of curiosity and I read it, and I was kind of surprised because it wasn't that bad. which led me to think, hey, he's not a big fan of me. That he was surprised that I might actually write a good story. So there you go. Okay, another question from Alan. Also Batman related, what did you think of Norm Breyfogle? I thought he was one of the most dynamic artists to ever be involved in comics, but I can't understand how he seemed to be relegated before his untimely death. Was he blacklisted or something? That guy should have had a 100-issue run on Spider-Man after his time on Batman. I just can't understand it. Yeah, I've talked about Norm before. Norm is a great guy. Norm is a very private guy. He's very inside his own head kind of guy. And he wasn't rude. He wasn't, but you never knew quite what was going on. The wheels were always turning, if you know what I mean. But, nice guy. Absolutely incredible artist. I only got to work with him one time, and I was over the moon because, as I've said in previous videos, I think he and Alan Grant together, boy, Alan Grant's getting a lot of love on this video, isn't he? I think he and Alan Grant really kept Batman cool and consistent for a long time. I mean, they had a long run on the Batman titles, and it's just fantastic work throughout. It's consistently good stories that are true to Batman, and creation of some terrific villains. I mean, the ventriloquist is one of the best Batman villains of recent decades. So recent decades, 4 years. So yeah, but the thing is, Norm wasn't blacklisted at all. I mean, he could have kept right on working at DC. He decided he had made money, and he had banked a bunch of royalties and stuff like that, and he was basically, I guess you'd call him like a spiritual guy, very philosophical guy. He was going to just take off to an ashram and meditate. So he's just going to chill out and not work. And that's what he did. I mean, it was of his own choice. He sort of bailed out of comics of his own choice. And of course, when he wanted to come back, comics is a swiftly moving river. You can't leave for a long time and come back and expect to take the place you had before. And so there really wasn't a whole lot of interest from the publishing company, even though he was obviously still extraordinarily talented, still young. And you're right, it's tragic. I mean, the young guy who really physically took care of himself very well. We were all shocked to hear first that he was ill, and secondly that he had passed away. But yeah, it was a sabbatical, I'm going to say. He wasn't blacklisted for any reason. Alan's got another one. I'm a huge Conan fan and recently completed my collection of Savage Sword of Conan. On a previous episode, you said you continued to write the book for an Italian publisher after it was canceled in America. Do you have any more info on these? Yeah, they were Marvel Italia kept publishing La Espada Salvaje de Conan. And and they contacted me. I think this was in the waning days of CrossGen, when I was allowed to work outside. My exclusive contract with CrossGen was canceled, and I was allowed to accept work from other publishers without violating my contract. And Marvel Italia contacted me and said, we're still doing stories. Would you like to write some? And I said, well, as long as I get to work with my Argentinos amigos, which they didn't object to. All of my Argentine artist friends were regulars in Italian publishing. So they said, yeah, let's put some stuff together. And I did. I wrote, I looked this up now. I actually wrote more issues than I thought I did. And some of these I don't even have copies of. I'm going to have to find. But I vividly recall, and obviously I have a copy of it because I scanned a story I did with Enrique Villagrán, which featured Red Sonja. And the only difference between the Italian Savage Sword of Conan and the American Savage Sword of Conan is that the Italians wanted more nudity. So you got to see a lot more Red Sonja in the Italian comics than, I'm not showing any of the nude shots here, but than you did previously. So, they really wanted you to lean more into the sex, more into the violence in these comics. And it's Conan, so why not? I mean, what's Conan about? It's about sex and violence, unapologetically. And I also got to do some terrific work with Ruben Marigi, another Argentine, who previously had not gotten to work with, but I was familiar with his work through the Villagrán studio. And I always wanted to work with him because, look at this. Why wouldn't I want to work with him? This guy's stuff was, as the Argentines say, muy brutal. So, we did a couple of stories together. One of them was called The Mammoth Hunters, which one of my favorites. And I realized doing the research for this video, I don't even have a copy of that. I have Xeroxes of the artwork, but I don't have a copy of the comic itself. So I'm going to be looking on eBay. If there's anybody in Italy listening that knows where they can find copies of my missing Savage Sword of Conan issues, like these two, one of these is by Tomas Giorello, another of my Argentinos amigos. I didn't even know that story was ever drawn. I wrote it. I don't remember much about it because it's been a long time. But apparently it was drawn, and this was the Mammoth Hunters issue. And I apparently do not have a copy of this anywhere in my stacks of stuff. But yeah, it was fun. It was fun working with them, fun working with my friends. And the only reason I didn't continue is because the book was canceled. So I think that ultimately Marvel lost the license. See, the thing is, Marvel still had the license, but they weren't doing any more Conan. And the Italians were like, well, if you still have the license, we're still going to produce Conan. So they produced it till the license ran out. Craig Giles. The 90s era in comics is becoming popular again, despite for some time being derided for its excessiveness due to the number of extreme new characters and gimmick covers, etc. Do you have any stories about that era? Crazy character concepts from editors or extreme plot ideas or events that didn't come to pass? Also, if you were asked, are there any characters or ideas from that era that you would revisit? Yeah, it was a great era for creators because the money was there. I mean, sales were huge. Kids were reading the comics. That was the coolest thing about the early 90s, is I would go to a convention and there would be these enormous lines for creators, and over half of the people in line would be kids, adolescents. And I liked seeing that because, like, this is our next generation of readers. I mean, this is who I write for. I don't write, I love all you, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old fans. I mean, that's great. You're the bulk of my fan base now. I love you guys and love you gals, but I really wanted to see kids too, because kids are the children are our future, I've been told. That was the coolest thing. But unfortunately, speculation got in the way, and people overprinting, and like you mentioned, the gimmick covers. And they went to the well once too often with that crap, and kind of, the big selling comics, the trendy, faddish comics, didn't really concentrate on creating endearing characters, characters with any kind of legs. And so it all came apart because readers just lost interest. The core readership, which was the young readers I'm talking about, they just lost interest. I mean, the comics looked cool, but there was no reason to come back month after month because the stories weren't that interesting. And they were too extreme. Now, an example of one of the crazier extreme things, because the explosion of Image and the explosion of sales and everything else had everybody looking for the next hot idea. And here's where Kevin Dooley comes back into the picture. Kevin Dooley, who I mentioned previously on Guy Gardner. We were going to do a Green Lantern and Green Arrow crossover, big tradition at DC. So it was going to be Kyle Rayner and Connor Hawke. And I think we had done one before. So it was me and Ron Mars. We had to cook up this crossover thing with our editors. And I went up for a meeting, and Ron was there, and my editor, Darren Vincenzo, was there, and Kevin Dooley. And Kevin Dooley had this idea. He didn't have an idea for crossover. He had an idea for a gimmick. And the gimmick was that Kyle and Connor would kind of experiment with being gay, because neither one of them, in his mind, they weren't sure if they were straight or not. And they wanted to confirm it by basically fooling around. Then mostly he just wanted a cover of the two of them kissing. He thought that would be a huge seller. Get a lot of notice. And you've seen enough of these videos to know how that went. I just said, there's no way in hell I'm ever doing that. And we spent the next hour with him trying to convince me this was a great idea. And I said, it's a terrible idea. It's a stupid idea. Connor Hawke is like 18 or 19 years old. He would know if he was gay or not. Because the thing was, I created Connor Hawke as a reaction to his dad. Oliver Queen was the biggest pussy hound, the biggest womanizer in comics. I mean, he was always, looking for some strange. And I wanted Connor Hawke to not want that reputation. Kid was raised in a monastery, for God's sakes. So he doesn't want to, he wants to follow his dad's footsteps in the role model of a hero, but he doesn't want his dad's bad reputation for chasing the chicks. And so he makes a concerted effort not to do that. Well, to some of the immature minds out there in fandom as well as at DC Comics, if he wasn't constantly hounding after women or he didn't have a current female love interest, that meant he had to be gay. And I'm like, no, there's nothing in the story that makes you think the guy's gay. And he would know whether or not he was gay. I mean, is this making any sense? And I said, you just want to do this as a gimmick. This is cynical. This is cynical marketing. You're turning the comic into what you see as a freak show in order to sell comics. I said, no, if you want me to create a gay character, I will, but it's not going to be Connor Hawke. And he said, well, this would dispel because they would kiss and not like it. And this would dispel the rumors that he's gay. And I said, well, why would Kyle Rayner, who's been demonstrably heterosexual, why would he agree to kiss Connor Hawke? Would you kiss your best friend just to help them out and see if they're gay? It just didn't make any sense. It was just silly and demeaning to everybody, including the gay community. It's like, so an hour went by and, nothing was happening. Ron Mars spent the whole hour looking out the window. He didn't want to get in the middle of it. And I think finally Darren just like, look, Chuck's not going to change his mind. This ain't happening. And it didn't. So that's one of the weirder stories from the 90s. It was basically driven by this hunger for sensation and extreme stories and, big news. If you could get on NBC Nightly News with your comic, and I had no interest in being on the NBC Nightly News or any other news. I just wanted to do quality comics that were fit in the current continuity of that character. Now, one of the things I missed about the 90s was Elseworlds. Elseworlds at DC was so cool. It was so cool to write for. And there was a little bit of that going on at Marvel. They didn't have an imprint or a name for it, but you were allowed to fool around with Marvel characters. But DC encouraged the Elseworld stuff because it spawned a lot of toys. The most successful one I did was Pirate Batman, it spawned a line of Pirate Batman toys at Kenner. And DC was very happy about all that. And that's one of the things I miss. One of the things I think they should continue doing because characters like Wonder Woman, Superman, Batman, they're so iconic that you can do stories of them set in any period, set in any genre, and you're not taking anything away from them. You're just making them cooler. Craig Giles again. Recently, Mark Miller posted a piece about how big name creators need to go back to work for the big two to help drive sales in the comic industry. I feel one of the many issues with DC and Marvel is everyone trying to put their own twist and stamp on the characters instead of respecting what came before them and just writing good stories. What are your thoughts on what Mark Miller said? Well, I mean, I think that the problem isn't that we've always had creators who wanted to put their own stamp on a character and it kind of violated everything that came before, kind of, blew the continuity up. We've always had, it's just narcissism and lazy writing, basically. It's a mix of both. It's like, well, I can make the character better, combined with, I really don't know how to write this character the way he should be written or she should be written. And it all seems like a lot of hard work. So I'm just going to change everything to the way I want it to make it easier for me to write. And that's morphed into autobiographical comics, which the ultimate end of the road for narcissism, which is I'm not going to make the comic even about the character. I'm going to make the comic about me. I'm going to change this character into me and write stories about myself as if I could, fly or fight crime in a cape and boots. And, and lazy writing is poorly crafted writing. I mean, you got lazy writers. They don't do the work. It's just all turns to crap because they really don't give a damn about a continuing career in comics. And they don't give a damn about the comics themselves. And they really don't care about the characters. And that's where you get to where we are today. Now, what Mark Miller actually said is that the major companies should pursue creators, big name creators, to draw them back. Big name creators who have left to work for Hollywood or left to do crowdfunding or left for the independents or left for their own creator-owned projects. the big two should work to bring those people back to save DC and Marvel. He wasn't saying that, big name, big earner creators should, sacrifice themselves, and go back to the old shop and, support the school, support the team. No, he's not saying that. He's saying that the big two should try to convince them to do that. And it's not a bad idea. But the problem with that idea, I agree with the sentiment, but it's too late. They should have done it years ago. Because we've lost like maybe 2 generations of readers. So if you brought back the biggest, hottest comic book talent you could imagine to do Spider-Man or Wolverine or Batman, the problem is that they were hot 20 years ago, 30 years ago. New readers don't know who they are, and more importantly, could care less. So I don't think, yes, you could certainly, by bringing back more experienced creators, there's a lot of underemployed comic book talent out there, still at the peak of their powers. Bring them back to actually write the ship and do some decent comics. That'd be great. That'd be great for the quality level and everything else. I'm not so certain it would bring back sales because, how would you market that? Johnny Potato Salad is going to be drawing, Captain America this month. Yay! But, 99.999% people out there are like, I never heard of Johnny Potato Salad. Who cares? So, to me, the answer is big events involving the characters, not the creators. And of course, you're going to bring in the top creators to do it. And I've talked about this a number of times in recent videos. Do some really shit hot crossovers. Find the 2 biggest properties you can think of that would create curiosity if they were combined, and combine them. And then get the best talent you can. I'm not necessarily big name, just really good writer and good artist to make an impression. Like, I've used the example of Superman versus Spider-Man. When they did Superman versus Spider-Man, they needed to make money. They needed to sell that comic. They needed to bring back readers to reading comic books with Superman meets Spider-Man. And they took it seriously. And they did, it's a really well-written comic. It's a gorgeously drawn comic. And it accomplished what it was meant to do. It brought readers back to reading, the comic book reading habit, purely out of curiosity. And they didn't come back because, who wrote it or who drew it or anything else. They came back because, hey, it's Spider-Man and Superman together for the first time ever. I want to see what that's like. So that's how it works. That's the kind of promotion they need to do. They need to push these characters in quality product rather than bring back big names, because there's really only a few names around that move the needle on a comic. And as the years go on, they move that needle less and less because there's fewer and fewer readers who remember them or care about them. So on one hand, he's right. In order to save the quality of the comics, bring in some people that know what the hell they're doing. As far as bringing in sales, I don't think, it naturally follows that sales would increase. Because as we know, sales don't ever increase on comics over time. You sell the number 1 to the speculators, and then number 2 issue falls to the wayside, no matter how good or bad it was. It's still, it's still weirdly a collector's market, even though that's shrinking as well. Comics. Hey, Spin Rack is on Discord, and Graham Nolan and I are there as well. And if you're a big fan of QR codes, here's a QR code. And you can follow this to join Spin Rack on Discord. And we got people doing artwork and writing stories and cooperating with each other. We got people that are like putting together comic projects of their own just by meeting at Discord. And as I said, I'm there, Graham Nolan's there. We're critiquing stories, we're critiquing art, we're giving pointers, we're giving examples. There's a number of essays up there and videos. You get to see videos of Graham, like the evolution of a cover and things like that. And there's sections for letterers and inkers and pencilers and writers and everything else. So if you're a comic book wannabe or working comic book professional and just want to join a vibrant, fun community of like-minded comic book folks, here's your QR code. Scan it. Get it on your phone. Follow us. So there you go. That's it for this week. I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. And thanks for all the great questions. And I'll see you.